approaching 2:30, and now we're into round three of our walk around some amazing thinking and emerging technologies that can be used in education. When I first talked to the Phonak team, I was so impressed, not only by the science behind the technology, but also the fact that it could benefit teachers as much as the learners. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Richard, um, Richard and Neil and Matthew Boydgibb from Phonak, who are going to give us a wonderful insight into the world of sound and classrooms, and how actually there's things you can do that can make learning so much more accessible for so many more kids. Thank you, Richard. Over to you.
Thank you for that intro. I hope to live up to that. So my name's Richard. I'm an audiology and training manager with Phonak. I am an audiologist by training, so I studied hearing and hearing loss and fitted hearing aids for sort of 5, 6 years, and then have been with Phonak for the last 7 years, mainly focusing. And for that whole 7 years, I've had a particular focus around the education scene, whether that's hearing aids, cochlear implants, children fitted with hearing aids and cochlear implants, or this Roger equipment into classrooms. So I'm really excited to be talking to you and introducing you to some of this technology today. So instead of just telling you about the technology, what I wanted to do was kind of talk about the auditory soundscape of a classroom. What actually is hearing in a classroom like? We then will look at the benefits that technology can bring, what we have, how many options, how flexible is the Roger system? Is it something you can use just for one child? Is it for everybody? Is it for the teachers? What classroom? Every classroom, etc. We'll answer those questions. And we'll also look at some of the research and evidence behind it. And the research and evidence, Marius has mentioned it in the intro, something that's really dear and close to our hearts. And particularly when you twin that with our work with pediatrics. So for in the hearing aid world, granted it's a niche world, but in the hearing aid world, Phonak as a hearing aid brand is synonymous with pediatric fittings. For the longest time, we've been the most trusted partner for the most vulnerable group of patients with hearing loss, which are our kids from zero, from a few months old, all the way up until they sort of start going off to university and college. So we have 50 years of experience having pediatric specific design in terms of hearing aid and wider technology that we're exploring today. We have specific designed solutions for children. So when we look at our hearing aids, they're not just hearing aids that we give to adults, but in fun colors. We are specifically looking at what the needs of the children are. And it's the same when we look at the solution for a classroom. It's not just thinking, would this work in the workplace? Will this work in the classroom? But we make bespoke products for that classroom environment. We also work with a group called the Pediatric Advisory Board, who I'm going to bring up on screen now. We've been doing this for 25 years. And all of these faces in the picture here are leading experts in terms of audiology and pediatric care and provision. From the different formulas that are used to decide how much gain a child needs, through to pediatric ENT specialists, through to product specialists, all get together every year to continue to push forward about best practices for pediatric fitting and thinking about the classroom education and making that as accessible as possible for everyone is a key part of what they talk about. So that's a little bit about us. Another big part about us is we're not just focused on solving a hearing problem. That is obviously key number one. But actually, what does that mean to the patient? We might think of it as if someone has a hearing loss, they miss out on what's being said. So if we give them a hearing aid, they can now hear what's being said. Happy days. But actually, we know the impact of a hearing loss can have a huge impact on things well beyond just did I hear, didn't I hear that? It has a really big impact on your overall well-being. Some strong research around a hearing loss having a negative impact on someone's cognitive abilities. There's lots and lots of research around well-being and hearing loss being linked with social emotional well-being and also physical well-being. And we're going to explore how this works in a classroom situation for children with a hearing loss as well. So let's giving you a bit of a background about who we are, our vision, what our mission is. It's not just about being able to produce a system or some technology that helps children and teachers hear better. We want them to live better. We want them to learn better. We want to have a more natural classroom where friendships can thrive, that those memories that we all have of school, the positive ones at least, we can help be a part of that journey. So when we think about a classroom, in the kind of traditional way of thinking about it, we think about teacher teaching and then students listening. But that's not really often the case in classrooms in 2024. It was starting to change when I was in the classroom in the 90s and the 2000s, when Matt was in the classrooms in, I don't want to put a decade on it because he may give me some repercussions later, but I imagine at that point it was more teacher teaching. And then as I was in school, it was less teacher teaching. And now in school, it's even less teacher from front teaching. And it's much more broad than that. And actually, if we break that down, 20, less than a quarter of the time is that kind of lecture style teacher teaching. And there's much more student, student, peer to peer, group to group, working in pairs, discussion time that's super important. But that makes the acoustical environment of a classroom more challenging. Acoustically, was it easier to hear in a classroom when a teacher spoke and the kids all sat silently? Absolutely. But that's not the best way for kids to learn. Even children with hearing loss learn better in this new setup, even though they may have heard more words if we looked at it from a speech understanding point of view. So what we want to look at is how can we best support everybody in the classroom? So if we look at what is a classroom like? Is it a nice, quiet place to listen and learn? Or is it a bit more of a challenge? Well, if we just have a classroom with one person speaking, we get about 60 dB of noise. So that's a normal conversational level. As soon as we start to go into group work scenarios, that noise goes up quite a lot. 73 dB of noise is like a busy restaurant on a Friday night. Or think of a classroom where there's lots of people working together. Children chatting at a table, that can be quite noisy. Even silent reading isn't silent. 56 dB is, to put that into context, if you're walking through the middle of the countryside, just you and your dog, and you're walking over some of the leaves that are falling on the floor in winter, that will register at about 40 dB. So a silent reading classroom at 56 is still quite a long way from being silent in terms of the environment. So we have this real variation of noise. It's dynamic, it changes. It's really important, every single scenario there, that we're hearing the best for all participants in the classroom. And when I say participants in the classroom, I mean children with normal hearing, children with hearing loss, and the teachers themselves. So one thing that we know from our pediatric research and our experience for the last 50 years with children is that children don't hear the same way as they do when they become adults. Our auditory system continues to mature, continues to develop and change till we're about 25. So even those students at university don't have the same auditory processing ability that they're going to get until they're in their mid 20s. This is quite an obvious case of if you have at home, if you have anyone sort of between the age of 1 and 6, and they're maybe glued to the TV. At the moment in our house, The TV show of choice is Bluey. So if anyone listening has children at home, you'll probably know Bluey. And there's no point me trying to communicate with my 15, 16-month-old baby toddler whilst Bluey is on, because attention is glued directly to the TV. However, he could have the same amount of attention and sort of captivation in the TV at age 13. If I said his name, he'd be able to respond. And that's a show of auditory development, and as that changes throughout the time. So, what are some of the key indicators? Well, we know children listen differently to adults. They're still developing this. And because of that, how we teach, the environments we teach in need to be considered. And often they're not considered. We kind of just put them in a classroom. We've seen how noisy it can be. And we're not taking into account this kind of development and this maturity of the auditory system that is kind of lagging behind what the teachers are experiencing as fully fledged adults. Another really key part is something around glue ear and ear infections. So when we think about this often from a hearing loss point of view, it's a child who has long-term glue ear. They might have it for 3, 6, 9 months at a time. They get seen by ENT, they may get seen by the audiology department. But did you know that of those under 8, 80% of them at some point will develop glue ear? That might only last for 2 days. It might only last for 1 day. It might last for 2 weeks. It might go completely undetected and undiagnosed. You might just think that child's having a couple of off days. They've got a cold or they're just misbehaving. They've had a falling out with their best friend, so they're off. Their behavior's changed. But it could be quite likely linked with having glue ear. They're not hearing as well as they could be. Now, by the time they get a GP appointment, that might have all cleared up. By the time definitely they've gone to see an ENT consultant, it's probably cleared up. But it means that any moment in any classroom in primary, chances of at least one of those children having glue ear is pretty high, even if there's no hearing loss, underlying hearing loss in that classroom. So what that means is in most classrooms, in most schools, even if everyone's got normal hearing, temporarily at least, there's likely to be a child that does have a hearing challenge. And so, what do these things kind of add up into? Well, we have this fancy saying in audiology called signal to noise ratio, and it basically just means how much of the speech can we hear versus the background noise, or how much of what do we want to listen to is there versus the rest. And for an adult, we have a certain level that we need to get, and that's different for every adult, and hearing loss has an impact. But for children, even children with normal hearing, they need to have an additional 5 dB or 5 decibels worth of signal to noise ratio. And what that means is that speech that's coming needs to be 5 dB louder than it does for an adult for them to be able to hear the best way possible. That's quite significant. There is a rule that says for every 3 dB you increase, that is a doubling in volume. We don't like to use volume in audiology. It's a bit of a banned word. But if we go up by 3 dB, we're basically doubling the volume. So to have an extra 5 dB needed is not insignificant. Another challenge for a classroom is something called reverberation or echo in a room. Wherever you're sat now, if you're in an office, maybe don't do this, but if you're sat in a home office or you're sat in an empty classroom, wherever you're sat and you kind of just shout, hey, and then you can hear the echo around the room. That's the reverberation. If you have lots of soft furnishings, curtains, carpets, wallpaper that's sort of velvety, if you live that sort of life, then good for you. You probably won't get very much reverberation. Whereas if you live in a minimalist house where everything's a hard surface, then you'll get loads of reverberation. The more of that echo that we have, the harder it is. And one of the challenges, if we think about every classroom, is reverberation often tends to be much higher than is ideal. So that means the more echo we have, the worse our speech recognition can be. Then the third challenge. So the first challenge is we need to have that differentiation between the signal we want to listen to, the speech, and the background noise needs to be bigger for children than it does for adults. The echo in the room has more of an impact for children than it does for adults. Classrooms tend to have quite a high reverberation. The other impact is distance. So this is often why previously we would talk about children with a hearing loss need to sit at the front. And that's because if we're nice and close within 2 meters, speech understanding's pretty good, 89%, pretty happy with that. But if that child is sat at the back of the classroom, teacher hasn't moved, not changed their behavior or the way they're teaching, that now drops to 36%. Now, what's scary is I introduced this as a child with hearing loss. These stats were done with children with normal hearing. So it means that in theory, every child should sit at the front. In practice, that does not work. We have creative classroom solutions now where the front of the classroom doesn't necessarily exist in the way it used to, but still there's always going to be this distance between the student nearest and the student furthest from the teacher. That has impact on our students, but it also has impacts on our teachers. They've got to raise their voices to overcome the challenges of being the clearest signal, overcoming the reverberation and overcoming the distance. So we set up a problem. We have these classrooms with a variety of children in them, those potentially with hearing loss, those with normal hearing but might have glue ear, so have a temporary loss. We've got those with normal hearing, and we've got teachers who are in the classroom. What's the solution that works for everyone? Well, a sound field system or a speaker and microphone setup increases that signal to noise ratio by boosting that speech signal. By doing this, we're helping the children pay attention better, hear better, and understand better. And we know that this then positively influences reading and language scores. We also know it helps to control the volume in the classroom better because there's a better signal. The noise never increases as much because more children are paying more attention more of the time. So I introduced this concept of well hearing is well-being, and then I set up our problem of the classroom. And so if we then bring in this sound field solution that we're going to introduce in a bit more detail in a moment, what are some of the benefits in terms of well-being? If we think about it from a physical well-being point of view, well, I already said children with hearing loss often get carted to the front, might not be sitting with their friends, not sitting in the classroom where they feel comfortable, but that's where they have to sit. Using the sound field system, there's no limitations in the classroom for where children can sit. We also don't limit the teacher in terms of mobility. They can roam around that classroom and know that they're being heard by every child wherever they're stood. It also, therefore, reduces the vocal strain for a teacher, reduces the reoccurring problems that come with raising your voice and talking all day, vocal strain, throat infections. I currently, you might be able to tell, I'm recovering from such. I have a child in nursery, so forgive me if I start coughing throughout. But if I'm now a teacher and I go into a classroom and I have to raise my voice, chances are by the end of the week, I'd have another vocal problem. Using the sound field, we reduce the risks and the strain associated with that. From a cognitive well-being point of view, we are helping kids learn more efficiently and more easily. So we know we're going to give them better reading, this is where my cold doesn't allow me to say those words, awareness of phonics, increased attention and focus, and easier to learn. This is often something that's really interesting to think about. It's not just what we're teaching, how we're teaching it, but how are we setting the environment up so that learning can happen? And that's such a big part of a classroom, big part of what teachers are thinking about. But often the auditory element of that is forgotten. We think about the visual, we think about having achievements up on the wall and what the classroom looks like. Often we forget about its acoustics, but using the sound field system, we can bring that into the forefront and bring it as a real positive change. And then also social emotionally, we see better behavior and attitude. We see that classrooms don't get as noisy, that the teacher doesn't have to raise their voice as much. Because a clever thing, before I get into the actual product itself, but as the noise gets louder, the sound filled microphone that we have turns itself up. So the teacher talks at its normal level and the speaker gets louder. So then the classroom then settles back down. It helps improve engagement, interaction, participation. It helps improve self-esteem. Because we're not then having to pull out those children with hearing loss and say, you sit at the front, they can sit wherever they are. They can then sit with their friends or sit with the people they're more comfortable with, as long as their behavior allows them to do so and the teacher allows it. So we set up the problem that a classroom has, that it's not necessarily auditory, acoustically, the most ideal scenario to learn. But we've learned also the why and the different challenges that children have in terms of their auditory development, whether they've got normal hearing or any associated hearing loss. And we know that this sound field solution can help. So now let me introduce you to what that sound field solution actually is. So we call it Roger, and Roger has lots of parts to it. The first key part is the microphone. It's called the touchscreen microphone. It's a really simple device that's worn around the neck of the teacher, and you turn it on and you pair it once, and then you don't need to pair it again. And this talks directly to the sound field speaker, the Digimaster. I am going to go into a little bit more detail around this speaker in just a moment. Those two are sort of the cornerstone, but they're not the only parts of the puzzle. We also have a multimedia hub, because we know that teaching isn't that I'm lecturing and you're listening. We're using videos, we're using media from other places. You can use this device to plug into a whiteboard, laptop, iPad, whatever the teacher's using, and stream the sound through the speakers as well. We also have pass around microphones. This means that every child in the classroom now can use the microphone and hear themselves through the speaker. So now we're doing group teaching and we're getting that peer-to-peer conversation going, and everyone gets their chance to talk and everyone hears them. So whether they're quiet and reserved or whether they're loud and brash, talking through that microphone, everyone in the classroom gets access to what that child has to bring, improving the self-esteem and the education of that child and also everyone else in the classroom. And there's a nice, neat charging solution all in one, so you're not having to have lots of things plugged into the wall, which can be a bit of a nightmare from a practicality point of view for teachers. Nice, neat, all in one classroom solution. So as I say, the touchscreen mic and the Digimaster are the real heroes, and we're going to focus on the speaker, the Digimaster, in a bit more detail now. But that whole classroom solution that we talked, that the whole classroom isn't necessarily set up the best for the acoustical environment, we are very proud to have a solution that makes that classroom the ideal listening place to learn, to teach, and to love. So let's have a look at some of the options. The Roger Digimaster 5000. So the Digimaster is what we call our sound-filled speaker. So this has 12 individual speakers within it. And the reason we do it this way is we break the voice and we break the speech down into 12 different parts to give a really nice, clear, crisp sound. When you first listen to our sound field, it doesn't sound as boomy and bassy as you would expect when you have a microphone and speakers. And that's because we're focusing on the clarity of speech so that everyone can be heard very clearly, not just heard louder. If you have a slightly larger space, so the 5,000, perfect for a classroom, but we now move into the school hall, for example, then we have something called the 7,000. that has even more speakers within it. It has 15, and we recommend you have two. And what this does is then gives you the ability to cover evenly a large space with a really clear sound. So wherever you're placed in that school hall, you're going to hear the best. So if we think of an assembly situation, reception children at the front, the year sixes on the benches at the back, normally the year sixes start to get a bit fidgety towards the end because they're having to strain and listen to the head teacher at the other end over maybe 300 younger children than them. Using the Digimaster 7000s in that environment would make that sound clear and crisp to every child wherever they were sat. With the Digimasters as well, we've kind of updated them in the last 6 to 12 months. And we talked about that multimedia hub. But if you don't have that, actually, there are still options. We now have Bluetooth within the speakers, which means you can Bluetooth them to the smart board, the TVs, any smartphones, tablets, laptops, etc. So you can have that wireless streaming from your any device if you need to, giving you another connection solution as we kind of broaden our connectivity in the world. One other thing is that's really important is we have an audio input and an audio output. So the input makes sense. I can Bluetooth in, I could use the multimedia hub, or I could hardwire a headphone jack in. That makes sense. That's really useful. Why would we want an audio output? So the microphones, teachers talking into the touchscreen mic, that goes to the speakers, all the children can hear. Why would we want to get the audio out? Well, if we do the audio out, we can plug that into a laptop, and that can be used with adjoining software for speech to text. And we know that speech to text is super important to have live subtitling, super important. We know the better the system hears that sound, the better the signal to noise ratio, the better the speech to text, the subtitling technology can work. We know we've got a really good signal to noise ratio by using this system. So by providing an audio output, it allows us to connect with those wider assistive technologies so that we can bring in better auditory so everyone can hear, but with the support of the speech written in text alongside it. If we can have the best of every world, why wouldn't we go for it? And that's what our system allows for. We also, in this new generation, have made it a bit bassier. So I mentioned at first, a couple of slides back, that we very much focus on speech. And that's true. The only time we add in a bit more bass is when we're streaming for things like music. We want, to give you a fuller sound so that you don't have to, you want to play some music in the background while the kids are going off to break. You can just have one speaker set up that does everything as well as it can. So it can be your party speaker for the end of term board games, but it's also your teaching speaker, giving you the best speech understanding for the 99% of the other time you're in the classroom. So some of the other practicalities when it comes to the speaker itself is, where do you put it? Well, every classroom is different. It's going to be unique, and every solution is going to have its own. So we've made it nice and flexible. You can have a stand on the floor. You can have a desk stand. There's a tripod if you need to be able to pick it up and move it to places. The most common and the one we recommend is the wall mount, because it's up on the wall, out of the way. So if children are running around the classroom, they're not going to knock into it. But we know that every scenario and every situation is different, and being able to provide flexibility to put our solution wherever it is super important. So hopefully you've seen that the classroom acoustically can be a bit of a challenge, but there's a solution for it. We know that children, their auditory systems, whether they've got normal hearing or not, are not as mature as they are for adults. But we know what the deficits are, or what the differences are, and what the things to make it better. And what's great is the challenges of the auditory system maturing in children and the issues that classrooms have acoustically can be solved by the same solution. We've got a solution that kind of ticks every box, but is it easy to set up? Well, this little video hopefully will show you how easy it is to do.
First, you put the stand together. Next, you affix the speaker. And lastly, you pair your mic. No IT or facilities team needed.
That is maybe the shortest video I'll ever present because it is as simple as that. You don't need caretakers, you don't need facilities. You just plug in the speaker, you pair the microphone and the speaker, and you go. It's as close to plug and play as you can possibly get. Now, you might need facilities if you want someone to screw it into a wall, just to make sure you're not screwing it into anywhere inappropriate where there's going to cause wiring or plumbing issues. But it is designed to be as simple and as easy as possible and as flexible as possible. So one of the things I said at the very beginning, one of the things I'm most proud about working for Phonak is the amount of research that we do. I highlighted our 50 years experience with pediatrics specifically, and the 25 years of the Pediatric Advisory Board. I've pulled out some other stats and other bits of research, but here's the final bit of research I wanted to pull out. So what we've got here is percentage of words got scored correctly. The black bar that you see vertically are a classroom normally, and the green bars are a classroom using the system that we've explored today, the DigiMaster. Along the bottom, we go from quiet environments all the way up to 75 dB of background noise, which is really loud. If we remember back to one of the slides earlier, silent reading is at 56 dB, which is the third bar along if we have a look. So quiet never happens in a classroom because the most silent a classroom will be is in that silent learning time. And even then, we see that there's a small benefit between the black and the green being the use of sound field. So even in those silent environments, at least, using the sound field is going to give us a small advantage. As we increase that background noise, you can see there's a big variation difference between the black bar, that's just the classroom naturally, and using a sound field system. Kids hear significantly better, particularly as we get into the noisy environments. Average noise in a UK classroom, different studies suggest different things, but it's around the 70 dB mark. So if we pull out 70 dB of background noise, which is on average an infant school, primary school noise floor throughout a day, using a sound field, we're scoring 12, 13%. With a sound field, we're scoring well over 60%. Think of the amount of benefit every single child, every single teacher is going to get with that level of understanding improvement throughout one lesson, throughout one day, throughout 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, a whole education system and journey. So one of the questions that Matt and I often get asked is, well, who is the sound field for? You know, we're Phonak, we are very closely associated with people with hearing loss, and rightly so. But when it comes to the sound field, it's one thing that Matt and I particularly love to talk about because we stop talking about hearing loss and people with hearing loss, and we start talking about absolutely everybody, because all children in a noisy, reverberant classroom would benefit from a sound field. Most, if not all, classrooms are unsuitably noisy or unsuitably reverberant at some point in the classroom day. Every child will benefit from having the additional help from a sound field, whether they've got a hearing loss, a temporary loss due to glue ear, whether they've got normal hearing, whether there's any sort of neurodivergence going on, whether English is a secondary language, everyone will benefit. It also is a massive benefit to the most important people in the classroom, which are the teachers. There's a significant number of days that are lost every year to teachers going off sick to throat related, voice related diseases. My wife trained as a primary school teacher, and I remember early when in her student days, she once called in sick because she had no voice. Everything about her was okay. If I woke up like that now, okay, yes, I've got to do this presentation, but I wouldn't have been able to call in sick because I, she felt okay. She was okay in herself. She just couldn't speak. If you can't speak as a teacher, that's quite a big impact. So if we can reduce that, that's going to be massive for every child, the teachers themselves, the schools, the head teachers, the governors, the parents, everyone benefits. So we also know that hearing is an emotional sense, and hearing well has a really big positive impact on someone's overall well-being. So if we're interested in the physical well-being, the cognitive well-being, and the social emotional well-being of all of our children and all of our teachers, then a sound field is a great solution for every classroom there. So hopefully that's giving you a nice insight into why we're so passionate about classrooms and the providing a solution for the auditory challenges that can come, raising awareness about that, and knowing that the status quo doesn't have to be where we're at. There are solutions that are there designed to make a massive impact for every child and teacher.
Richard, thank you so much for that presentation. That was
Should-
superb. Again, please use the chat function or the Q&A function if you do want to make any points. I think, of course, there's going to be some individuals who will go, "Oh my God, cost, cost, cost." Now, what's the cost of a teacher being away
Mhm.
if they can't hear? And if you start looking at the common sense of perhaps having, and look at the mobility of your system as well. It's not like it has to be fixed in a particular place.
Yeah,
You have a opportunity to move around.
it's,
Matthew,
it's
have you
also the
got any
comparison.
insights to give about how some such settings are using it, not just for the learners, but also for their staff?
I'm sorry, I missed that first.
Oh yeah. Have you got any insights about how some settings are perhaps using it as much for their staff as for their learners? Have you seen it
I
being
think that's a
used?
yeah. I think it's general consensus is the focus is very much, of course, on the pupils themselves, and that's very important. And we've shown scientifically why it's required for the people listening in the room. But of course, yeah, what people do find, anecdotally definitely find, is the fact that they don't. When you start to use the equipment, you actually continue overemphasizing your words, and you probably speak too loud. But after a while, you realize I don't need to. I can speak conversationally, like we do normally, and this equipment does the job of raising your voice. So absolutely, absolutely, yes, that's the feedback we get.
I have also had a conversation with a school where their staff meeting has moved into one of the classrooms without any conscious decision.
Hmm.
There was no conscious like we're going to do it there, but the teacher had the speaker set up. They had two pass around microphones as well, and they kind of happened to sort of start to merge and walk in, and they did one meeting in that classroom. So although the speaker's portable and they could have picked it up and moved it into the staff room where they would normally have had their meetings, they found themselves creatures of habit 3 months later, every week when they have their staff meeting, congregating in this one teacher's classroom because they had the setup there ready to use. And it was better for them as teachers to have their teachers meeting there and their staff time together. Then obviously we had a conversation, you can move it or you could get more systems, etc. But that was quite a nice one where
Hmm.
habits changed because the benefit was there.
Oh, wonderful! No, that's superb. I know we demoed the system in a really noisy. It was an exhibition. Michael and I were there, and it was really interesting to hear how clear
Hmm.
the speech was. And I think a lot of people who don't understand sonics think, well, if you just put up a loudspeaker, um, everything will be fine.
Yeah.
But could you explain a little bit more about the breakdown of sound? Because I think it'll help people understand, the whole thing about sibilants and consonants and vowel sounds, how your speaker system really helps to bring those speech sounds out.
Yes, absolutely. So I think a really good example of thinking about speech is thinking about a newspaper article. So if you are reading a newspaper article and you took away all of the vowels and you just had the consonants, you'd be able to read that newspaper article, you'd be able to tell what it was about, you'd be able to probably guess the newspaper it came from and the opinion they wanted to share with you. Lots of information. In fact, all the information is there. If you were to remove all the consonants and just leave the vowels, it would just be a mess of letters that you would make no sense of. And that's very similar in terms of speech as it is written. So the consonants hold all the key information of our speech. The vowels give us the volume, the grandeur, the tone. So they're important, but they don't hold as much information. Now, the consonant sounds tend to be at the higher frequencies and they tend to be quieter, and
Yes.
the vowel tonal sounds tend to be lower pitched and louder. And a way that you can hear and feel this is if you put your fingers on your voice box, and as you talk, you can hear your voice vibrating. So if I start saying vowel sounds like A, E, I can feel my voice vibrating. But if I go to some of those consonant sounds, and we call them sibilants, they're made in the voice, in the mouth itself. So things like s, f, t sounds, I can't feel my voice box moving because those sounds are not created here. They're created within the mouth itself. That means that they're quieter.
Mm.
Challenges with high frequency, those higher pitched sounds, is they don't travel as far. It's why you might turn a corner and you can hear traffic as you're walking along the street. Then you turn a corner, you can still hear traffic, but suddenly you can hear the birds and you couldn't hear them before. And it's because the high pitches haven't turned that corner, they've not traveled as well. So what we have is this mix of the most important parts of speech are at the highest frequencies, and they're the quietest sounds, and they don't travel as easily. And when we put hearing loss in the mix, often it's the highest frequencies that people lose first, or for children, that's the part of their hearing which is worst. So it's a combination of everything.
Mm.
Those loud, boomy sounds are heard often quite well. They travel very easily. Elephants use very low frequencies to communicate over hundreds of miles. Birds do it over hundreds of yards, if that, hundreds of feet. I'm using an imperial system. I'm a metric. I don't know why I went into imperial.
Don't mix them together.
So
Yes.
what our system does is focuses about on those sibilant sounds, not ultra high frequencies, but those mids and highs. And it's all about trying to get them to match up with those lower frequencies so they have an even chance. So we're giving that extra distance, we're giving that extra emphasis, that extra clarity to what's going on. And you're right, using our system, often you're using it and everything seems fine. Then you switch off the system and you carry on talking and you see everyone lean in because it's making such a massive difference, but no one's noticing it. And it's because we're trying to do it in a really natural way that kind of encases you rather than shouts at you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Great timing as well. Thank you so much indeed, Richard, and thank you, Matthew, for giving us insights not only to the product, but I think also to the world of sound and the importance of that in our classrooms today. That's been marvellous. And again, if anyone on the call wants to know more, get in touch with Michael Buckfield, who will put you in touch with Phonak immediately. And yeah, we look forward to hearing more of you in the coming months. Thank you so much, gentlemen. That was brilliant.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us.